Once there was a man named Charles Edwards, a very wealthy man. He owned large estates, multiple luxury cars, high-end hotels, and a flourishing business empire. However, as he grew older, Charles found himself weaker, and the comforts of his wealth couldn't shield him from the reality of aging. One evening, while sitting in his grand study, Charles stared at an old family photograph and asked himself, "Who truly loves me in this house? Who will stay by my side when I'm sick and helpless?" Charles thought deeply about his family and their past actions. Though they appeared to care for him, he wondered if their concern was genuine or merely motivated by what they would inherit when he was gone. The thought weighed heavily on him. Charles devised a plan. He decided to pretend to be terminally ill to test the loyalty of his family. He summoned his trusted lawyer, Samuel Hayes, and his personal doctor, Dr. Bennett, to his mansion, Oakwood Heights. After sharing his plan with them, both agreed to assist. Samuel suggested hiding part of Charles' wealth in a secret account to prevent anyone from pretending to care about the money. Dr. Bennett agreed to falsely diagnose Charles with cancer, telling the family he had only months to live. With the plan in motion, Charles prepared to see who among his family would remain loyal when he no longer had the ability to provide for them. The next morning, Charles began coughing loudly, refusing to eat properly, and looked weaker each day. He stayed in bed, no longer going outside, and stopped his usual walks. His wife Evelyn and children Liam, Marcus, Rachel, and Zoe noticed his decline immediately. Rachel cried, "We need to call the doctor." Dr. Bennett arrived and conducted an examination. Afterward, he delivered the news, "I'm sorry, but Mr. Edwards has cancer. He has only 6 months to live." Everyone was shocked. Evelyn placed her hand on her chest, and Zoe cried out, "No, Daddy, please don't leave us." Liam and Marcus were in disbelief, their faces pale. For the first few days, the family went to great lengths to care for him. They brought food, sat by his side, and spoke comforting words. But after a week, things began to change. Evelyn stopped visiting him. "I can't watch him suffer," she said. Rachel said she was too busy, and Marcus said he had to travel. Liam focused more on the family business, meeting with executives and taking charge of day-to-day affairs. One day, he walked into Charles' study with papers in hand. "Father," Liam said, "I think you should rest. Let me handle the company. You need to focus on getting better." Charles quietly nodded, observing his son. Though his body was frail, his mind was sharp, and he was taking note of Liam's behavior. Meanwhile, Evelyn, instead of caring for Charles, began spending more time at spas and socializing. She neglected her husband completely while he pretended to grow weaker. His family, whom he had worked so hard to provide for, was showing their true colors. The only person who remained genuinely concerned was Zoe, the youngest. She stayed by Charles' side, feeding him, cleaning him, and even sleeping beside his bed. The days passed, and Charles continued his charade. He stayed in his bed, coughing loudly and growing weaker by the day. His family, who had once shown so much concern, started to shift their focus. Evelyn, once so involved in caring for him, spent her days shopping and socializing. Rachel, too, became distant, claiming she had her own responsibilities to attend to. Marcus traveled frequently for work, and Liam took complete control of the family business. Despite their growing indifference, the family maintained the appearance of caring in the first few days. They brought food to Charles and would visit his room to offer comforting words, but Charles could see through the facade. He watched as each of them slowly stopped checking on him. One morning, Liam entered the study with a pile of business documents. "Father," Liam said, "I think it's time for you to rest. You need to let go of the company now, and I'll take over." Charles, who had been watching his son closely, simply nodded, his mind racing. Liam was eager to take control, but Charles knew that his time had come. The change in his son's attitude was clear. He wasn't concerned with his father's health, only with his inheritance. As Liam moved forward with his plans to run the company, Charles couldn't help but feel betrayed. His son's words, though polite, showed a lack of care. He had long suspected that Liam was only interested in the family business and its wealth. And now, the truth was becoming painfully clear. Meanwhile, Rachel, who had once been very close to her father, began to drift even further away. She focused on her own life and left her father to the care of Zoe. Charles noticed how little Rachel put into visiting him. She would come, but only briefly, offering quick words of encouragement before rushing off to attend to other matters. The only one who stayed by Charles' side was Zoe. Despite the behavior of the others, Zoe never left him. She fed him when he was too weak, cleaned his room, and even slept on the floor beside his bed. "I'll never leave you, Daddy," she would say, holding his hand and comforting him through the darkest days. Zoe had become his anchor. She was the only one who seemed to truly care. But even she was beginning to notice the strain. She began to speak up, asking her mother, Evelyn, if they should seek medical help abroad. "Maybe there's still hope if we try a different treatment," Zoe suggested one evening. But Evelyn, uninterested and weary, shook her head. "It's too expensive, Zoe. He's going to die. We can't waste money." The contrast between Zoe's dedication and the indifference of the rest of the family was becoming more apparent. Charles, still pretending to be on the edge of death, lay quietly in his bed, his heart heavy. He had spent years building this empire, sacrificing his time and energy to provide for them. And now, in his weakest moment, they were showing their true selves. Charles could feel the weight of their lack of care. But he kept quiet, watching and taking note of everything. The only one who showed him any real love was Zoe, his youngest daughter. As the days wore on, Charles' physical condition worsened, or at least, it seemed to. His family continued with their lives, but it was clear to him that their behavior was revealing their true intentions. Liam, eager to take charge of the business, began to make decisions without consulting Charles. One afternoon, Liam walked into Charles' study, where he sat quietly, watching his son with keen eyes. "Father," Liam said, "I think you should rest. Now, you don't need to worry about the company anymore. I'll take over the leadership and make sure everything is handled." He placed a stack of papers in front of Charles, signaling that he was ready to take full control of the empire. "You just need to relax, and I'll take care of things." Charles said nothing but nodded weakly, pretending to be too tired to respond. Inside, he was observing everything with sharp clarity. He noticed that Liam's concern wasn't for him, but for the family business. His son was more interested in the power and wealth that came with the position than in his father's well-being. Meanwhile, Marcus, who had been traveling frequently, returned one day, his mind focused on his personal life. He didn't even visit his father in his room, only exchanging a few pleasantries with the family. Rachel, too, had become consumed with her own affairs, and her visits to her father grew shorter. Charles saw how quickly his children had shifted their focus to their own desires. The wealth and status that came with the family name were now the priority. Yet, the one person who remained genuinely concerned, the one person who had always been there, was Zoe. She continued to care for her father, even when everyone else seemed to forget about him. One evening, while Charles lay in bed, pretending to be frail, Zoe sat beside him, holding his hand. "I'll never leave you, Daddy," she whispered. "You're not alone." As Charles' illness continued, the truth about his family became undeniable. Evelyn, once so devoted, had grown increasingly distant. She spent her time with friends, indulging in shopping trips and dinners, paying little attention to her husband. She even began spending time with a younger man named Ben, whom she met during one of her social outings. They would meet frequently, and Charles noticed the changes in her behavior. She had stopped pretending to care for him entirely. Zoe, ever devoted, noticed the shift in her mother's actions, and confronted her one evening. "Mama," she said, tears in her eyes, "why are you doing this? How can you leave Daddy when he needs you most?" But Evelyn, cold and unfeeling, responded, "Your father is dying. I have needs too, Zoe. I'm not going to spend my life sitting by his side while he's weak. I deserve to be happy." It was a heartbreaking revelation for Zoe. She had watched her mother become someone completely different, abandoning her father in his time of need. Meanwhile, Liam and Marcus were caught up in their own pursuits. Liam began throwing extravagant parties and spending money carelessly. He had no concern for the company or its future. He only cared about what he could take from it. Marcus, too, had indulged in his newfound wealth, spending money on luxuries and enjoying the attention that came with it. Zoe, watching everything unfold, was devastated by how her family was treating her father. She was the only one who stayed by his side, caring for him selflessly while the rest of the family fought over the inheritance. Despite the growing indifference around her, Zoe remained steadfast. She took care of Charles with more love and devotion than ever. She fed him, bathed him, and stayed by his side day and night, ensuring he was comfortable. Even as her family showed their true colors, Zoe never once hesitated to show her love for her father. One evening, Zoe, deeply concerned, approached her mother, Evelyn, and suggested they seek medical help for Charles abroad. Maybe there's still hope if we try a different treatment. Something outside of what we've been doing here, Zoe pleaded. But Evelyn dismissed her suggestion with a cold reply. It's too expensive. Your father's going to die. We can't waste money on something that won't work. Zoe tried to make her mother see reason, but Evelyn wouldn't listen. Zoe, however, couldn't let go of the hope that there might still be a way to help her father. She continued to care for him, doing everything she could to keep his spirits up. Even as the rest of the family became consumed with greed, Charles, still pretending to be on his deathbed, watched everything with a heavy heart. He saw how his family, whom he had worked so hard to provide for, was turning their backs on him. He realized that only one person truly loved him for who he was, not for his wealth or status. That person was Zoe. As Charles continued to feign illness, his family's behavior became even more alarming. Liam, eager to solidify his control over the family business, started making reckless decisions. He began spending company money on extravagant parties, hiring his own friends for high-paying jobs, and making risky investments without consulting anyone. The company that Charles had built with his blood, sweat, and tears was slowly falling apart. One evening, Liam called a meeting at the family mansion. "I've decided that we need to make some major changes," he announced. "The company is failing. Under the old structure, I'm going to hire new people and make everything fresh again." The words stung Charles deeply, but he said nothing. He had known that Liam's interest in the business wasn't rooted in a desire to continue his legacy, but rather in claiming it for himself. As Liam spoke, Charles quietly observed, noting how his son seemed more concerned with the company's wealth and status than with his father's health. Meanwhile, Marcus, who had become enamored with his own luxury lifestyle, continued spending money carelessly. He'd bought new cars, splurged on clothes, and treated himself to expensive vacations, all while pretending to care for his father. Charles watched as his second son, too, seemed to be only interested in his inheritance. Rachel, once the most emotionally connected with Charles, had also distanced herself. Her visits were brief and filled with excuses. "I have work to do, Dad," she would say, offering a quick hug before running off. Charles could feel her indifference, her absence growing more pronounced each day. Zoe, however, remained the only one who stayed by Charles' side. She continued to care for him, cleaning his room, feeding him, and comforting him when the loneliness became too much. Every night, Zoe would sit by his bed, holding his hand, promising she would never leave him. She was the only one who truly cared for him. But even she began to notice the strain, as if the behavior of his children wasn't enough. Charles began to notice something even more troubling. Evelyn, his wife, had stopped caring for him altogether. She had begun to spend more time with a younger man named Ben, whom she had met at a local spa. Their relationship grew more public, and it became increasingly clear that Evelyn had no intention of caring for her husband any longer. Zoe, heartbroken by her mother's behavior, confronted Evelyn one evening. "Mama," she said softly, tears welling up in her eyes, "how can you do this? How can you leave Daddy alone when he needs you the most?" Evelyn, with cold indifference, replied, "Your father is dying. I have needs too, Zoe. I can't spend my life sitting by his side while he's weak and helpless. I deserve to enjoy life." Zoe was crushed. The woman who had been her mother, the one who had once promised to stand by her husband through thick and thin, was now turning her back on him. Evelyn's actions left Zoe feeling even more isolated, as she was the only one left to care for her father. Despite the growing tension in the house, Charles remained silent. His plan was working. He had already seen who truly cared for him, and who was only interested in his wealth. As his family continued to fight and make reckless decisions, Charles quietly took note of everything. But he wasn't just watching them. He had a plan to protect what was rightfully his, and he wasn't going to let them destroy everything he had worked for. One day, Charles asked his lawyer, Samuel Hayes, to help him with something important. Samuel had been helping Charles secretly move assets and secure his wealth. It was Samuel who had quietly bought back the properties that Liam and Marcus had been selling off, including the luxury hotel that had been sold without anyone's knowledge. As the days went by, Charles continued to pretend to be gravely ill. He had given his family the opportunity to prove themselves, and they had failed. But there was still a glimmer of hope. Zoe. She remained the only one who had shown him real love and care. The tension in the Edwards household reached its peak when Liam and Marcus got into a heated argument over the family's wealth. Liam, who had been squandering the company's resources, wanted to sell off more assets to cover the expenses of his lavish lifestyle. Marcus, on the other hand, was furious that Liam was wasting the family's legacy. The argument escalated quickly, with Liam accusing Marcus of being a fool and Marcus calling Liam reckless. The shouting grew louder, and the entire household was soon involved in the chaos. Zoe, heartbroken by the sight of her brothers fighting, rushed to the living room. "Why are you two fighting?" she cried out. "This isn't what Daddy needs. He needs our love, not our greed. Why are you all acting like he's already gone?" Her words fell on deaf ears. The fight between the brothers grew more violent, with furniture being overturned and glass shattering. Evelyn, meanwhile, watched from the sidelines, indifferent to the fighting. Charles, still lying in his room, could hear the commotion downstairs. The sounds of his family's fighting echoed through the halls, and he couldn't help but feel the weight of their betrayal. They didn't care for him. They cared only for his wealth. After the failed attempt to read his will, Charles decided it was time for the truth to come out. He had watched his family tear each other apart over his wealth, and he knew that only one person had shown him true loyalty. It was time to end the game and reveal the truth. The next morning, Charles gathered his family in the living room. They sat anxiously, unsure of what was coming. Charles, now fully recovered and strong, stood in front of them. His presence was commanding, and his eyes were filled with the wisdom of a man who had seen through every lie. "I have something to confess," Charles said, his voice steady. "I was never sick. I never had cancer. It was all a test to see who truly loved me and who only cared about my wealth." The room fell silent. His children, who had fought over his properties, looked at each other in shock. Evelyn, who had abandoned him, was speechless. Charles continued, his voice firm. "Zoe is the only one who truly loved me. She is the only one who stayed by my side when everyone else turned away." He turned to his children. "Liam, Marcus, Rachel, and Evelyn, you have shown me who you truly are. I gave you everything, but when I needed you, you were more interested in my wealth. You will no longer have any part of it. I have decided to leave everything to Zoe." Zoe, who had been standing quietly by her father's side, looked at him with gratitude and love. Charles smiled at her, proud that she was the one who had passed his test. The family was left in shock as Charles walked out of the room with Zoe, knowing that she would restore the family legacy. His final test had been a success, revealing the true nature of those closest to him. The tension in the Edwards household reached its peak when Charles gathered his family together in the living room. The atmosphere was thick with anxiety. They had no idea what to expect, but each of them was quietly wondering what their father had to say. Charles, now fully recovered and stronger than ever, stood before them, commanding their attention. He had seen enough, and today was the day the truth would come out. "I have something to confess," Charles said firmly, his voice steady and commanding. "I was never sick, I never had cancer, it was all a test. A test to see who truly loved me, and who only cared about my wealth." The room fell deathly silent. Liam, Marcus, Rachel, and Evelyn looked at each other in shock and disbelief. They had been so sure of his impending death that they never suspected it was all part of a larger plan. For weeks, they had shown their true colors, and now, the man they had tried to manipulate stood before them, stronger than ever. Charles continued, his eyes piercing as he gazed at each one of them. "Zoe is the only one who truly loved me. She is the only one who stayed by my side when all of you turned away. I have been watching, and now, I know exactly who you all are." He turned to his children. "Liam, Marcus, Rachel, and Evelyn," he said, his voice cold and resolute. "You have shown me your true selves. You fought over my wealth and cared nothing for me. You will receive nothing. I've decided that all my assets, my wealth, and the business will go to Zoe. She's the only one who has truly shown me loyalty, and for that, she will be the sole inheritor of everything I've worked for." The family members were in shock, unable to process the magnitude of what Charles had just said. Evelyn stood frozen in place, her face pale, her lips trembling. She had abandoned him for a younger man, and now, she would lose everything. Liam, who had been so eager to take control of the company, stared at his father with a mix of disbelief and anger. Marcus, too, was stunned. Rachel, who had been so busy with her own life, had no words. Charles turned to Zoe, who had been standing quietly by his side throughout the confrontation. His eyes softened, and a small smile spread across his face. "Zoe," he said, his voice filled with pride, "you have made me proud. You've shown me what true love is. I'm entrusting everything to you now." Zoe, though overwhelmed, smiled back, her heart filled with gratitude and love. She had never once faltered in her care for her father, and now she would carry on his legacy. Charles turned to his lawyer, Samuel Hayes, who had been standing in the corner of the room, watching the exchange. "Samuel," Charles said, "I need you to take care of everything. Make sure the company is transferred to Zoe's name, and protect the assets that the others tried to steal." Samuel nodded, a solemn expression on his face. "It will be done, Mr. Edwards," he said. Charles looked back at his family, who were still in shock, and sighed. "You all had your chance. You had your opportunities, but you chose greed over love. You chose selfishness over loyalty. You will now live with the consequences of your actions." He turned to Zoe, his eyes filled with pride. "Zoe, the business, the house, everything is yours now. You will lead this family with strength and integrity. The company is in good hands with you." Zoe nodded, tears in her eyes. She never expected this moment to come, but she knew her father had made the right choice. As she looked around at the family members who had failed him, she knew she had the responsibility to restore what they had torn apart. Under Zoe's leadership, the company flourished. With integrity and dedication, she revived the family business, restoring it to its former glory. She worked tirelessly, always putting the company's well-being above all else. Loyal employees, many of whom had been fired by Liam and Marcus, returned with enthusiasm, grateful to be part of the revival. The business expanded, new branches opened, and Zoe's leadership was recognized with several awards. Liam and Marcus, now stripped of their inheritance, had to find their own way. In the world, they sought jobs elsewhere, their once lavish lifestyles a distant memory. Evelyn, who had abandoned Charles in his time of need, disappeared from the family's life. Her relationship with Ben unraveling as quickly as it had started. She would never again see the wealth and comfort she had grown accustomed to. Charles, proud of Zoe's accomplishments, watched from his quiet study. He had been betrayed, but through it all, he had learned the true nature of those closest to him. Zoe had proven herself worthy of his legacy, and in the end, she was the one who carried on his name and his empire. As for Charles, he found peace. Though his health was not what it once was, he had no regrets. He had lived a full life, and now, it was Zoe's turn to lead. The legacy he had built was safe in her hands, and for the first time in years, Charles felt a sense of calm and satisfaction. The world may have been full of pretenders, but Zoe was the one true heir.